Hello and welcome to this week's episode of NLDR, the narrative lectionary podcast for people on the go. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, joined this and every week by my friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Robertson. This week leads us into the book of Isaiah, chapters 5 and 11, the Song of the Vineyard, and Isaiah's prediction of an ideal king. We talk about Isaiah's poetic strategy for showing the people the error of their ways, recognizing an ideal king by how well he executes justice for the poor and vulnerable, and whether you can reasonably sue your garden for producing bad lettuce. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Bobby. It's good to see you.
Hey, Amy. It's good to see you too. This week, we are moving into the book of the prophet Isaiah. So last week, we were also in the prophets. We were in the book of Hosea, who is one of the minor prophets, or part of the book of the 12. This week, we're in Isaiah, one of the three major prophets, along with Jeremiah and Ezekiel in the Hebrew Bible. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of chapter 5 and a little bit of chapter 11, following the narrative lectionary. I thought we might just start by giving a little bit of background about Isaiah. So what do you think we should know as we start to read the book of Isaiah?
You have probably read some of this book before, whether you are Jewish or Christian. It comes up a lot in different kinds of texts. The rabbis love this text, and Christians love this text also.
Yeah, we do.
And I think part of the reason that we love it so much is that it can mean a lot of things.
Yes.
Say that. I mentioned last week that poetry just sort of in general has this multivalence, and we uncovered some of that in Hosea last time. It could point in a lot of different directions. That is definitely true of the book of Isaiah. Most scholars believe that this book really should be divided into sections, 2 or 3 sections, and that really are written by probably different people in different times. All of the sections that we're looking at today, chapters 5 and 11, are in that first section of Isaiah, which most scholars believe was written by someone who lived in Jerusalem during the 8th century BCE.
So his name, is given in the text anyway, is Isaiah ben Amoz, the son of Amoz. And he's 8th century Judean prophet. So he's roughly contemporary with Hosea, whom we read last week, except that Hosea was in the north and Isaiah is in the southern kingdom of Judah. So basically the second half of the 8th century, this prophet is prophesying.
So you may remember from learning about Hosea with us last time that the Assyrians have become very powerful, the Assyrian kingdom. And so that's a lot of sort of what's in the background here. At different times in history, the kingdom of Judah in the south and of Israel in the north sometimes tried to sort of get along with Assyria, maybe pay some tribute in exchange for defense and sort of make nice. And sometimes they try to revolt against Assyria by sort of teaming up together with other countries. And one of the things that Isaiah is interested in generally is this question of whether it's right and good and appropriate to be making sort of political alliances in this way, or whether the people of Israel, Judah and Israel, should really be relying upon God.
Isaiah thinks of Assyria as being kind of God's weapon that God can use against Israel and Judah when they disobey. So when Isaiah looks and sees Israel and Judah making foreign alliances or worshiping foreign gods or exercising oppression in various ways, as is mentioned in this text we're about to read, then God can call this enemy from Assyria to come and do God's bidding.
Isaiah is also really interested in, I guess, what we would consider sort of justice issues now, economic justice issues, the formation of sort of a wealthy class to the detriment of folks who have fewer resources, sort of leading to the further impoverishment of those folks. I think that's one of the reasons that this text resonates very much now in progressive religious communities. And Isaiah's got some great, beautiful ideas about how things ought to be. You know, what the messianic time should look like, or what time under the rulership of the Messiah should look like.
He does. So these two texts that we're reading today, the first text is Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7, and it is basically a woe oracle. as it turns out. It is God is not happy. But then Isaiah chapter 11, we're going to read verses 1 through 9, which is extending the narrative lectionary by a couple verses. But that is a very hopeful passage about a possible future. And so in the narrative lectionary, this combination of Isaiah 5 and Isaiah 11, we get both the judgment side and then the hope side. Because this poem kind of works as a whole, first I'm just going to read Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. As a whole, this is often called the Song of the Vineyard or something like that. And then we'll come back after we've read the whole thing and we'll look at it a little bit at a time. So Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7, I'm reading the New Revised Standard Version. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it, and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it will be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. Okay, so this poem starts with kind of a beautiful, hopeful image about a vineyard owner or a vineyard planter planting his vineyard. So what do you make of that image? What's going on there?
I mean, I think what I see is like a true, what we would call like a labor of love. Like there is both labor and there is love, right? There's a lot of work being done here, and he's planting a vineyard, not just a garden. You expect to get something from a vineyard.
Yeah.
Not immediately, but you put all that work in, and then you're supposed to come out with this like true ultimate symbol of happiness, wine, right? You're supposed to come out with wine.
I'm not a vintner, but I kind of feel like what I know is that you don't find out really how your planting has gone in your vineyard for like several years. You don't really know what the quality of the grape is going to be. And so while we get through this in like 2 verses, we imagine there's several years of work that are going into this process. When the vineyard owner goes to see what the product is, he expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes.
Not wild grapes!
I know. Yeah.
It's a great flavor of bubblegum, but it is not what you want in your vineyard.
Right, yeah. So there's like muscadines or something. I don't really know exactly what a wild grape is.
Yeah, you don't want that as a wine. That's not.
My grandmother used to drink muscadine wine.
Yes, it's a thing. I don't care for it.
Yeah.
Isaiah,
I don't think she wants people to know that, so don't tell your friends about.
Keep it on the DL.
Yeah. Now, the speaker of this song is, at least at this part, is not the vintner himself, right? So in verse 1, let me sing for my beloved. So this is a friend of the vineyard owner, and he's singing a song about the vineyard owner and his vineyard. It turns out in the end, when we get to verse 7, we're going to find out the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. So the vintner is God, and the vineyard is Israel and Judah. But we don't know that until the end. So the rhetorical strategy is really interesting, right? Because the prophet is gearing up for this judgment that comes at the end, but he does it by singing a song about a vineyard owner and a vineyard, and people are going to be drawn to that vineyard owner's experience, right? Of course, if I put all that labor in, I would be upset if my vineyard produced wild grapes.
But by having this whole thing written in someone else's voice, it's almost like there's a witness. There's like a quote, sort of a neutral witness to like, I, the speaker of this poem, how much love and work was put into this vineyard.
So in verse 3, then the speaker, I think, actually shifts so that Isaiah is now speaking on behalf of God, who is the vineyard owner, the vintner. So he calls on Jerusalem and Judah, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. This is lawsuit language, right? So now the vineyard owner is suing his vineyard for having produced bad grapes, right? What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it when I expected it to yield grapes? Why did it yield wild grapes?
I'm sorry. Once we get to this part, this just makes me laugh. Like, you have to help me. I know this is not the response that Isaiah is going for.
Right.
Judge between me and my vineyard. Like this.
Yeah.
You know that quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that's like, if your lettuce doesn't grow, no one blames the lettuce. They figure out it needs more light or it needs whatever. And it's supposed to be like, don't blame whatever, children who are not successful or people who need help or, look for the environment. But then, so then to go from that to reading a poem where it's like, judge between me and my vineyard. I don't know. I can't not laugh at this. I'm going to try though.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're making a good point. And because, I mean, you can tell as the metaphor slips toward God and Israel at the end, like you get what Isaiah is trying to do, right? God did everything God could do, and the people turned out to be wild anyway.
Grapes.
Yeah. But when you're still working with the source metaphor, because we don't have the big reveal until the end, then it really is this kind of like, if I have to judge between a vineyard owner and his wild grapes, whose fault is it? I'm pretty much going to say it's the vineyard owner's fault, or something like the soil is bad, or you
can't blame
different.
Grapes. That's silly.
So if we want to read with Isaiah's intent, then we're supposed to judge against the vineyard. But I do think there's an interesting opening here to say, well, why did it turn out wild grapes? Can we simply blame Israel, or is there something here in the relationship between God and Israel that really just didn't work? I don't think Isaiah wants us to read it that way.
Mm-hmm. I agree on both of those things. That is not what Isaiah is going for. But it does raise an interesting question if we want to pause to have sort of a moment of empathy for Israel or consideration of the situation Israel. And are there things that made this somewhat of an inevitable situation?
Yeah. I don't know, you're the vintner. Why did it yield wild grapes? You need to figure out how to do this thing. Mm-hmm. God didn't anticipate all the things that needed to be anticipated. I think one can certainly read it that way.
Yeah.
Isaiah now moves into kind of a judgment oracle. He's still speaking for God here. Now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard, right? This is not happy news. So the things that the speaker's going to do, I will remove its hedge and it will be devoured. I will break down its wall and it will be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed. It shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. So that's the plan that the vineyard owner now has for the vineyard. What do you notice in there that you think is important?
It starts with removing the external protection from invaders, right? It takes off the hedge and the wall, and then it sort of removes sort of any sense of care for it internally.
Yeah.
And then finally, just the basic elemental needs, it won't have rain. So it's just this sort of systematic destruction from all sides.
It's not that the vineyard owner goes in and burns down the vineyard or digs it up or anything like that. It's, as you said, it's removes the protections.
Yeah, that's true.
So I break down the wall. I built a wall to keep the animals out, but now I'm going to break down my wall. So here come the animals. I used to tend the garden to keep the weeds out, but I'm going to stop tending. So here come the weeds. The vineyard owner, here it becomes clear that this is God, right? But I'm going to withhold the rain from you. So I'm not coming out with my watering can anymore, and eventually you're going to dry up. And so the things that happen to the vineyard are sort of natural processes. They're not the vineyard owner wounding or injuring. It's the vineyard owner ceasing to protect, ceasing to nurture. And so when we think about that then as an image of God in Israel, God in Judah, it's that it reminds you a little bit of, the lines in Hosea, you thought that other gods were taking care of you. You didn't realize it was me that was taking care of you this whole time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then we have the big reveal that probably the listener has figured out by now. But if you were an original listener to this oracle or this poem and you had gotten drawn in, oh yeah, that stinking vineyard, right? And it should have
this guy throws a fit because his vineyard's not working.
Yeah. Then suddenly Isaiah flips the metaphor. So the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. And then he expected justice but saw bloodshed, righteousness but heard a cry. in the beginning, like wild grapes, like they were wild. This is what he is talking about, right? There's bloodshed and people crying out in oppression when there should have been justice and righteousness. Isaiah in the Hebrew has a really beautiful play here. So he expected justice, mishpat, but he received bloodshed, mishpach. So it's just different by one sound, right? Mishpat, mishpach. And then righteousness, tzedakah, and a cry, tze'akah. And so, like, it's close, right? Like, I planted grapes, but I didn't get grapes. I got wild grapes. Like, they were almost grapes, but they weren't. I wanted mishpat, I got mishpach. I wanted tzedakah, but I got tze'akah.
That's poetry. And it does make it harder to read it in English, but yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay, so anything we want to say about that poem as a whole? We've said a lot of things that I think are interesting. Anything that we've missed that we want to say about that poem?
You know, after my little temper tantrum about how you can't tell lettuce to grow or it's bad lettuce, I'm really appreciating what you said about how verses 5 and 6 really are more about taking away, like, okay, fine, this garden didn't work, so I'm not going to tend to it. Like, I built these protections and I'm going to take them away. It's not so much a punishment as like, this didn't work, so I'm not going to keep it as a tended area.
Yeah, I've got better things to do with my time.
Which is different,
than
right?
Try to grow lettuce it's not.
When lettuce is not going to grow here for whatever reason. Yeah.
So it's really just the line "judge between me and my vineyard" that kind of is irritating.
It's amusing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. If you kind of take that line out, or if you like think about it a different way, like what should I do now? Like, of course, I'm not going to keep planting lettuce in my little lettuce patch.
Right, it's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need the lettuce. What is it, like you planted arugula and you got iceberg? Is that the... No, because maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. You planted boring lettuce.
No, you definitely planted arugula and got iceberg.
I planted boring lettuce. Okay.
I don't know. I'm not a gardener.
So the narrative lectionary then moves us on to Isaiah chapter 11. The narrative lectionary is verses 1 through 5. So I think we'll start by just reading that and talking about that. And then I think it's worth moving on to beyond the narrative lectionary to include 6 through 9. They kind of belong together. I'm just going to read verses 1 through 5. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see or decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. What stands out to you in that little section?
I mean, I think the first thing I want to just point out, and I can't remember if we've talked about this in poetry or not, but is the presence of these sort of parallelisms in these lines that go together, like two lines that sort of say the same thing in different ways that we see a lot of here. So, you know, in verse 1, a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse, a twig shall sprout from his stalk. So those are like pretty much two ways of saying the same thing, and we see that over and over here. So it's just a good cue for me as a reader to take that as a way to sort of add dimension and richness to the, put those things together and think about the dimension of that, the image that's created to get a richer sense of the meaning without sort of moving on to, it's not a different set of ideas.
What does that mean? A shoot from the stump of Jesse, a twig from his stalk.
Well, I mean, Jesse is King David's father, right? So we're talking about someone coming from the Davidic lineage, and stump of Jesse. I mean, the Davidic line's not doing too great right now. They're sort of, cut down, but there's this idea of like a tiny thing that's going to sort of come off the side. It's not the lineage is not standing in its power right now, but something can still come from it. And I think that Isaiah wants some leadership from that lineage to come and help bring about this wonderful period that he describes.
Yeah, that image of like, when you chop down a tree in your backyard, or a tree falls over in the woods and then there's another little like new branch coming out or a new little sprout that comes out. That's the image here.
Yeah, it looks like it's dead, but
Yeah.
then you see this little new growth come out of it.
So the description is the Spirit of the Lord will be on him, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge, the fear of the Lord. He will delight in the Lord. What do you think is important that we take about what this new shoot from the stump is going to be like?
Isaiah's hope lies in someone from this dynasty who has a true sort of devotion to Adonai, who is wise and thoughtful and insightful. It doesn't talk about sort of might, like military might or power or that kind, it sort of has no frame of reference to the world of might.
No, it's interesting because the one place where it does kind of is in the second half of verse 4. He shall strike the earth with the rod, but it's not a rod like it's the rod of his mouth, right? It's not a rod that is wielded like a weapon, and then with the breath of his lips, that's his weapon against the wicked. So it's interesting that this, like, to the extent that there is a conqueror image here, it's conquering by the words that are spoken and the things that are breathed. And the same within in verse 5, the righteousness as the belt and the faithfulness as the other belt, like the garb that he wears when he goes out into the field are righteousness and faithfulness, not like plated armor.
This is a fairly idyllic world, I would say, that Isaiah is describing, but they're still poor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But sort of what's idyllic is that they will be treated fairly.
Yeah.
In the world, which Isaiah clearly doesn't think that poor folks are being treated fairly in his world.
So how do you know a good ruler? Well, you look at the poor and the meek. You look at the most vulnerable members of society, and you see how they're being treated. And if they're being treated well, if decisions are being made that benefit the poor and the meek, this is your ideal king. That's what the ideal king does. The wealthy, the powerful are not in view anywhere here.
Right. No, I like what you were saying before about how even when there continues to exist sort of an underclass or sort of a social class system where some people have more than others, that there's this sense that everyone gets a fair shake, though they start where they start. You can sort of function within the world and be judged fairly. You're not overly burdened or yoked by this label that you are a poor person, and so that won't continue to impact every decision that is made on your behalf.
Right. Or to the extent that it is used to make decisions on your behalf, it's actually a positive for you, right? If the king sees that there are poor and meek people who are suffering, the king's going to respond to them first.
Is it a sense of like fairness to everybody and sort of blindness to social situations, or is it really you need to be on the side of the meek?
It's kind of saying both of those things, right? In 3b, he won't judge by what his eye sees or decide by what his ears hear. So this is kind of a justice is blind sounded kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then in the next verse, he judges the poor with righteousness and he decides with equity for the meek of the earth, which to me sounds like the priority is making sure that the poor and the meek get their fair shake. So justice is more interested in equity and righteousness for the poor and the meek than it is in whatever are the issues of the rich and the powerful.
Unless this is intended as sort of a corrective to, since in Isaiah's current time, the poor and the lowly are never judged with fairness and equity, that by pulling out, they will be judged in fairness and equity. Doesn't mean no one else will be. It just means this needs to be noted because it's not a given. It hasn't been true.
So if the world if everyone was being treated equitably, we would not need to make those distinctions. But because people are not treated equitably, we have to make those distinctions.
Underscore that, yeah.
Okay, so the part of this that is not in the narrative lectionary is chapter 11, verses 6 through 9. So it's envisioning the world that results from this ideal leader from the stump of Jesse. And so in the NRSV, The wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea.
For me, this is just a beautiful image of how this kind of right order of things passes from the world of human society and systems and justice into the world of nature.
So that to the extent that humans are mentioned in this second movement, it's a little boy who is leading or herding the animals, and then a nursing child and a child who has been weaned. So we don't have any adults.
With snakes.
Yeah, and they're playing with snakes. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that playing with snakes thing is important, right? Because it's, at least in my mind, it's hearkening all the way back to Genesis chapter 3,
yes,
where when human beings ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they gained some kind of knowledge that was too great for them. The first thing that happened was they became natural enemies with snakes. You're going to step on their heads, they're going to bite your heel.
That's
and here,
right.
now they're playing together. So we're back, like, we have returned to some kind of Edenic state by establishing justice under this king. Who ought we think that this passage is pointing toward?
I think that in the ideal world, Isaiah imagines that there is a Davidic king, that we've gone back to the model where there's a Davidic king, but now we're going to be able to do it right. Like, all these kings had so many problems, but this king is not going to have problems. It
Right.
will be in the lineage that God has promised, and it is going to do it's going to reign in the way that God has wanted all of these kings to reign, and that will sort of be part of this whole idyllic system.
So in your tradition, is that how this text is now read, as it's anticipating some future king or leader?
There are Jews who believe in that idea. More popular is the idea of a messianic age, where it's just where we can live in a world like this world that Isaiah is describing, but not the idea that there's a person who's going to necessarily herald that age.
So scholars of Isaiah, who they think this person is depends a little bit on kind of where they think this poem ought to be situated. So for scholars who think that Isaiah ben Amoz, Isaiah, the first prophet Isaiah in the 8th century, wrote this, some think that this is a prophecy about Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, who's remembered in the Bible as one of the great reforming kings, along with Josiah, who we'll talk about next week. And so some people think Isaiah chapter 11 fulfilled in Hezekiah. Others who think that this comes from a post-exilic or late exilic author that really belongs to the second part of Isaiah but has been put here, thinks it's looking at a renewed Davidic monarchy with a new Davidic king after the exile in Babylon. Some scholars think this is about the ideal of a king, but that Isaiah doesn't have a historical person in mind. Now, as you might imagine, I think you were kind of anticipating in the Christian tradition, this king pointed to in chapter 11 is Jesus for us. I mean, if we read this text with Christian eyes, that's what we see. Stepping aside then from the Christological interpretation, when you think about these two texts, Isaiah 5 and Isaiah 11, either one of them or both of them, and you're thinking about how this has importance or relevance for your community today, what kinds of things are you thinking about?
My first answer, to be honest, is thinking about Isaiah as a leader and a person trying to persuade a community. And the different tactics that he employs really successfully. So the idea of, writing a story that really pulls your listenership into it and helps them empathize with characters rather than just yelling at them. And he created this sort of beautiful story that people could relate to, I think is a lot more powerful. And similarly, the sort of sense of hope and the vision that he puts forth in chapter 11 is so compelling. How could someone not want to live in this world? And I think the fact that it's done in poetry with such beautiful language, it takes us a little bit out of our practical mindsets and like maybe strategic focus and political questions a little bit, and just pulls us into this much more artistic, full, holy mindset.
I've been thinking a lot about your issue with Isaiah 5 and the judge between me and my garden, right? Which I think is a good point. But I've been playing with that in the back of my head. And here's what I've come up with is it is easy for us as the garden, right? As the seeds that have been planted to say we couldn't have helped it, right? What could we do? I'm a grape. I just come up the way that I come up. And this passage in its own kind of craziness of saying no, it is your fault that you came up wild. And there's a way of reading that which says you and I don't have any excuse in the same way that the garden doesn't have any excuse. Although maybe we think that maybe the garden should have an excuse. So whatever excuses we think we have for not being pursuing justice and righteousness, if the garden's got no excuses, you got no excuses. We have a responsibility to grow up in ways that produce justice and righteousness. And if we don't, then we haven't done what we're supposed to do. And so God is absolutely within the rights of the vintner to say fine, I'm taking down the wall and good luck out there. The thing that I am drawn to in chapter 11 is that this idealized reader and this idealized world, violence is not the way to achieve this idealized world, and it is not a part of the world so idealized. So even natural predators, carnivores, are being envisioned as finding another way to live other than violence. And so again, in this how much more so than we ought to be able to live without violence in our own lives. And this idea that we were pointing out, that the way that this ruler rules the world is through the words of his mouth and the breath of his lips and the righteousness and faithfulness that are girded around him, that there's a sense in which that is what is needed to bring about this world, is not the wielding of weapons of war, but the wielding of righteousness and faithfulness. And attention to the status of the meek and the poor. The first thing that we ought to care about is making sure that the meek and the poor are treated with equity and righteousness. Now all we got to do is go out and do that.
Great. I got it. I totally got it. I am not a wild grape.
You can read this as an anticipation of a time yet to come, but that does not give you an excuse just to wait for that time to come, right? There's a sense in which we ought to be striving for this idealized world, even now when we feel like that ideal world is not possible. That's not an excuse either, that we need to try to live into that world even when that world doesn't present itself to us. So next week, we are moving in the narrative lectionary back into 2 Kings, where we're going to talk about Josiah, who is one of the great reforming kings of Judah.
That's right. I look forward to it.
All right. I'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you soon. Y'all have a great week.
Thanks for joining us for NLDR, the narrative lectionary podcast for people on the go. We'll be back here next week to discuss 2 Kings 22 and 23, the story of King Josiah and his great Deuteronomic reform. We'll see you then.